This is Zestology, bringing you the new rules for living with energy, vitality and motivation. I'm Tony Wrighton. A couple of the things that really play on my mind as I'm walking through London is I love living in London. I love living in central London. And in terms of community, it's just fantastic. I'm about 5 or 10 minutes away from my home. It's not going to take me long to get home. Going out for dinner tonight, seeing friends, been out to the gym today, been walking around, can virtually walk everywhere in London. And that's absolutely fantastic. There are definitely certain things about living in London which aren't so good, one of which is pollution and the other of which is electromagnetic fields. And it's a balancing act, isn't it? You know, because if I was to move to the middle of nowhere in the middle of the country, then I wouldn't have that community. Today's guest has been on Zestology before, Daniel DeBaun. He's written a book. He actually sent me a book on EMFs that he had written, which you'll hear us talking about today. And he sent it to me before our first interview, and I constantly use it as a source of reference because it's so important, the stuff that's going on. If you're someone that keeps your phone in your pocket next to your crown jewels, you may want to listen to this podcast. If you're someone that sits on your sofa with your laptop on your lap on top of your crown jewels, you may want to listen to this podcast. You may think that I'm talking about crown jewels a lot. There's a good reason for that, and that is in today's podcast. Electromagnetic fields, how to mitigate the risks of them, and how to deal with them in the best way possible, because we're all subjected to certain levels of kind of radiation and fields, but we don't want them to adversely affect our lives. So that's it. That's the topic of today's podcast. Definitely something that will help you with energy, short and long term, if you get this right. And this podcast is all about energy, so worth looking at that. Here he is, Daniel DeBaun, talking energy and electromagnetic fields on Zestology. Daniel, we're recording. How are you? Nice to talk to you again.
Tony, thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate a chance to chat with you again and to the listening audience you have.
Well, your podcast, when you came on Zestology, it was a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, it was one of the ones that's had a real impact on me. And one of the things, you very kindly sent me one of your Defender pads for the kind of laptop, and I've used it every day since, and I still use it. And on and every once in a while, I'll pick up my laptop and I won't have it. And God, your lap gets so hot, quite apart from blocking the EMFs and the microwave waves and all the rest of it. Your lap just gets so hot when you forget to put something underneath it.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know if you remember, the reason I actually created that product was, a number of years ago, my wife had our sons visiting, and they had their laptops on their lap, and she said, "I want grandchildren. That can't be good for you." So she had some intuition that there was a problem there.
Yeah.
And it turned out 25% of the male sperm within a couple of hours is actually immobile. So she was absolutely right. And so by using that, there is the heat itself coming off the laptop, and that's good to shield if you can. But what you can see is the signal that's going into your body. It's also heating up the cells, as you may recall. The water in between the cells oscillate a bit, and your skin heats up as a result of it. So it's not just the heat from the device, but it's also the microwave that's hitting your body that you're trying to defend. So I'm glad you like it.
I do. Yeah. And I mean, since we last spoke, technology's got more powerful. The signal that comes off technology has become stronger, and it's probably more ubiquitous as well. More of us walk around with a phone in our pocket right next to our crown jewels. So it's even more relevant, this stuff, than it was 2 years ago, really, isn't it?
Oh, no question about it. Think about it this way. If 20 years ago, if I had a cell phone and I went to call someone, no one of my friends had a cell phone. They just weren't around. They just weren't around us. Devices like laptops and tablets, they just weren't around us. And over the last couple of years, everyone has them. And worse, children have them. And of course, with children, those kinds of exposures are even far greater problem, given that they absorb 3 times the signal than adults do. So you're right. It's like all of a sudden, it's all around us, and it's pervasive.
The question of the dangers of, let's take one example in particular, because nearly everyone listening to this will have one, and that is a mobile phone. The question about how dangerous they are has become something that is increasingly starting to be discussed. I read it a lot online, and I've read a lot recently in the press here in the UK, which I'm sure you get as well, about the links between mobile phones and cancer, for example. And it proves highly controversial, because when people say, look, we think there's a link between mobile phones and cancer, for example, there's a lot of top experts who will come up and say it's cherry picking, it's misrepresentation, not all radiation is bad, is not a conspiracy. You're basically cherry picking facts to say that there might be a problem with the technology that we've got in our pockets or around our homes. What do you say to that when you kind of read and hear those kind of arguments?
I have been in research for years and years and years. I think it's poppycocked for anyone of any intellectual skill to make a conclusion that it's biased information, cherry-picked data. In fact, what I've noticed, Tony, is I've looked at some of the research that claims there's no problem, and I see people referring to studies that have been done recently. And they make a claim that, for example, Dr. Paul is out of the U.S. in Portland, Oregon, and he's done a breakdown of the cell. Just how does it break down under these exposures? And I was reading this scientific report that said there was no problem, and they were citing Dr. Paul as saying there's no problem. That is so bizarre. Dr. Paul's whole point is the cell breaks down from the oxidative stress that occurs, of course, but more importantly, it's the calcium that penetrates the cell itself, and that's when you have the DNA and DNA damage and mutated cells.
Yeah.
So I get upset when I hear these arguments that say it's not a problem. In fact, since we last chatted, there have been actually 2 fairly large studies that were done. The National Toxicity Program, it was in the U.S. They spent $25 million on an epidemiology study. The reason they were doing it is because they wanted to prove, without a doubt, there's no linkage to cell phones. What they did was they had these transmitters that they put into this clean environment, in this laboratory environment, and they radiated for extensive periods of time, and they watched the populations die, literally. And then they did autopsies and looked for problems. Sad for them, good for us.
Yeah.
What they found was there was an increase, statistically significant increase in the presence of mutated cells, in fact, cancers of the brain. But it was the frontal lobe of the brain that most impacted, not the whole entire brain. And in fact, if you want to talk about statistics, there's been a 2% growth per year compounded every year for the last 10 years on frontal lobe cancer. So
and just on that, there was one article in particular that troubled me. It was by Naomi Elster in The Guardian. It was about modern myths about cancer. And she said, by 2008, mobile phone use was widespread, yet the number of people who got a brain tumour barely changed. And she also quoted the World Health Organization's Interphone study, saying that mobile phones didn't increase your chances of getting a brain tumour.
Tony, that's what upset me, because if you look at their data analysis, what they're saying is on the average of all brain cancers, it's been stable over the last 10 years. But if you look at the data on the impact of a cell phone to the brain, it's only to the frontal lobe. So if you look at the data related to the frontal lobe, it's 2% per year compounded every year for the last 10 years. Yeah. So they were cherry picking the data.
Yeah, okay,
And then here was this $25 million study that now was statistically significant. What that means is the populations were so large, they could say with a level of confidence, a 90 to 95% confidence level, that what they found was legitimate in general. Well, then out of your neck of the woods, actually, the Razzoni Institute out of Italy and a half a dozen other countries did a similar laboratory analysis, and they came up with virtually the same conclusions, that there was frontal lobe cancers related to exposures.
Right.
Now, what I didn't say is that the real surprise was that there was cancer to the heart that was elevated as well. It makes sort of sense because it's the very, very soft tissue that's most impacted from exposures. But really, all of us in the industry, when we heard that it was also statistically significant to the heart, we were surprised. So you can argue both sides and you can make much claim, but the facts are becoming more and more clear about the impacts of our modern day conveniences and their impact into our environment, more so than ever before.
Well, I agree, and I'm really glad that I mentioned that because I wanted you to take it down in that way, and you have.
Yeah, that I find very upsetting because it's misleading for a point, and we don't mislead. We just simply look at the data. Now, another thing, Tony, that's happening, and I'm sure you have that in the UK as well as other parts of the world, it's the 5G stuff that's coming along.
Right, yeah. Is that worse than 4G then?
Let me explain. I don't recall the last time we spoke how much time we spent on it, but let me explain. When you had an analog signal 15, 20 years ago, it was a constant load. If I take a steel rod and I put 10,000 pounds of load onto that concrete pad, I won't break the pad. So the analog signals 20 some odd years ago was this constant load. And then all of a sudden we had 2G, 3G, 4G come along. What was that? Well, that was where there was they call it a carrier signal that was carrying a load of data that was on and off, on and off. So all of a sudden it was an on and off information being carried on the signal. What does that mean? Well, let's go back to our example. If I take a concrete pad and 10,000 pounds load on the steel bar, and I lift it and drop it down, lift it and drop it down, it breaks the concrete. So all of a sudden we have this situation in which the data that's being carried by the signals, we know, have more damage to the cell and the body in general because of the way they transmit. So let's fast forward to today. On 5G, you have actually a case in which you have a much faster frequency rate. What do I mean by that? When I talk about cell phones, I talk about 1 gigahertz, maybe 2 gigahertz. What is that? Well, think of it this way. If you have 1 hertz, that's 1 cycle per second. It's a sine wave up and down once,
right,
in 1 second. If you have 1 gigahertz, it's 1 billion cycles per second. Really, really, really fast.
Okay.
If I were to go and look at the X-ray, that's terahertz. So it's trillions of millions. Guess what? An X-ray, if it's open to extended period of time, immediately breaks the cell apart. Actually, it knocks the electron out of this orbit and then ionizes it, and it kills you immediately, right? So now that we know that, what is 5G? 5G is projected to be up to 100 gigahertz. So where And most of it throughout the world will start off around 20 some odd gigahertz. 20 gigahertz is 20 billion cycles per second.
So that's enough to confuse the hell out of your cells in your body, isn't it?
Exactly. That's exactly what it does. And in fact, what we know, and here's some facts we know. When you have that kind of level of exposure, we know from science that the blood-brain barrier of the brain it actually gets screwed around with. The faster the speed, the faster, more likely your body's going to be disrupted.
So the closer you are to these kind of gigahertz emitting devices. Right,
that's exactly right. And so why is that screwing around with your blood-brain barrier? Why is that a problem? And here's why. A blood-brain barrier protects the cells of the brain, and the frontal lobe more specifically. Research we know for sure says that if you have 0.1 watts per kilogram, that's really, really, really a low amount, it can disrupt the cell, it can mutate and DNA damage the cell. 0.1. Your cell phone that you use every day is 1.6 watts per kilogram. So when you have a blood-brain barrier not protecting the brain, you can take that cell phone of 1.6 and it can potentially disrupt the brain, of course, and convert that energy into cancer. Yeah. So these speeds are not good.
Okay. I mean, it's really interesting because I can't remember if I read it in your book or we talked about it last time, but we talked about X-rays. And I went to a chiropractor a couple of years ago, and she said, "I'm not going to treat you unless you have an X-ray." And I said, "I don't want an X-ray." And I remembering having spoken to you, and she said, "I'm not going to treat you." And I said, "I can't believe you're not going to treat me. I just don't want an X-ray. I don't want all that needless, EMF and kind of potential cell damage when I actually don't. It's not urgent and I don't need it." And they said, "Oh, no one's ever refused it before. You can't come here." I feel I made the right decision, don't you?
Of course, because that's accumulative stuff. Yeah. So like if you have needless, someday they'll be essential. And the impact to the body, because it's cumulative, could be worsened as a result, or weakened even further as a result of that.
Because if you need an X-ray, you need an X-ray. But if you don't need one, there's no point in building the cumulative load of all the kind of electromagnetic fields and radiation that you're taking into your body.
Yeah, you got to remember when you go to the dentist and they throw this really, really heavy blanket on top of you, and they put this massive thing next to your teeth, and they run into the other room. They're not running because they want to get exercise. They're running because it's a X-ray exposure. So, right. Yeah. Yeah. So, there's some serious long-term impacts if it's not managed right. One of the biggest things about the 5G is that bacteria and viruses, they actually rapidly reproduce, and that's in contrast to the body's cells being suppressed. So, like, when you start getting exposed to these kinds of things, you're actually improving the health of the bacteria and virus, and they're more immune to these kinds of things than we are. In fact, there's a Dr. Barry Tower. You may know of him. He's out of the UK. Okay. He used to build weapons for the UK. His expertise was microwave. He used to build war weapons that were microwave signals. And so when I recently heard him in a discussion, he was talking about the frequency that's going to start with the 5G is very close to the active denial crowd control tools they use. I mean, they literally use it to stop people from advancing on them. So it's like pretty serious stuff. And yet, that's what's going around. And by the way, because these signals don't go very far, they're going to be about 250 meters. The towers will be about 250 meters separated. Now they're like 5 miles in U.S. miles, but they'll be 250 meters. What does that mean? Anybody within 300 meters of a tower is 3 times more likely to have cancer. So
is that right? What, anyone living within?
Anyone living within 250 meters from any tower, cell tower, statistically is 3 times more likely to have a cancer than those who don't. So,
I mean, bearing in mind, I'm in central London right now, almost certainly within 250 meters of a tower, and it's and then you have to start looking at measures to mitigate it, which I want to come on to in just a second. Just on that point though, what about the electromagnetic fields from train lines? I was recently considering moving house, and we saw a house for sale, and it's very near a train line. Not really that bothered about the noise. But would there be quite a few electromagnetic fields coming from the trains or from the lines?
Actually, there is. You may recall, Tony, we spoke about 2 different kinds of emissions that are contaminants in the environment.
Yeah.
One is the RF signal, the microwave signal.
Yes.
Well, there's this other, which is a byproduct of electronic working. Like you have wires in your house and you have a light bulb lit, you have a radio you play. When you use those devices and there's current flowing in those wires to that device, there is what is called extremely low frequency emissions. Anything below 300 hertz is also an emission. So most times you're fine because these are such low levels. When they're not low levels, near the power lines for trains, for overhead power lines, particularly at up to 10,000 volts, excuse me. So when thinking about that kind of thing, it's conservative, it's precautionary to avoid those kinds of things.
But of course, that house was really nice, and it was cheaper because it was near the train line, which is why it was tempting. But actually, I don't think it was overhead cables. I think it was like lines underneath rather than overhead. But even so, it does sound like those extremely low frequency emissions would still be relevant. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And they're concentrated in those kinds of environments.
So what about mitigating the risk? Because so far it's all been, I'm really glad that we've re-outlined the risk, because I think it is something that's important. It's something that one needs to be reminded of every once in a while. I seem to remember asking you before about those stickers that you can buy, that you put on a device, and they're very expensive. And it says there's a magnetic frequency interrupt from the stickers. And I was very tempted to get one of these to wear on my radio frequency packs at work. And you said, don't bother with the stickers, they're not very good. Is that still definitely the case?
Yeah. You may recall when we spoke about that. I think anything that can be proven independently that they do what they say they're going to do, that you should invest in it. But inevitably, all those kinds of products, they all make a claim, but there's no such thing as evidence to that claim. So it's simple. Show me the science and I'll understand it, and I'll agree or disagree based on science. I know of very little, if any, on those kinds of devices that are legitimate. So they may work, but I have my doubts. So you really should look, when you try to get protection, unbiased, independent, scientific research. Let me give you an example. of what you just spoke about and why I would be slightly suspicious. If you have a cell phone, it's a very, very, very specific frequency, and it goes to a cell tower. That means it's transmitted in a very, very concise way. And at the tower, they have a receiver that looks only at that frequency so it can receive that frequency and then process it. So if the frequency itself is being mucked around with, you're not having cell phone service because the receiver on the cell tower won't see the signal. So,
right.
I mean...
So that just wouldn't work if it wouldn't work. Stickers actually
really
worked.
Doing what it said it's doing,
okay, yeah. And what do you think? I think you guys sell, or Defender Shield sells, a mobile phone cover that if you use that, is it then okay to keep it in your pocket as long as the case is facing towards your leg?
That's exactly right, Tony. What started this was protecting my son's. But by the way, I don't have grandchildren yet either, by the way. I built it to protect them, but I still don't have grandchildren. But anyway, it was a simple device that prevents the signal from going into the body. It allows it to go anywhere else it wants to go, but not into the body.
And does that actually work? Because I would have just thought that it would just kind of seep out the sides.
Actually, even if it seeps out to the sides, that's fine. Because it's not directly going into your body.
Okay.
It's when it directly goes into your body that you have the cascade of many, many problems that could potentially be there. So, and so with the cell phone, we have a device where we cover the front and the part that you use to put your ear. And so you can still connect to the cell tower, but the signal can't go into the head. And I don't know if you recall that a RF, a radio frequency, a microwave, these are all omnidirectional. If you take your finger and you look at the center of the finger and pretend there's a little ball that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, goes into the room, and all these layers of balls going out, that's omnidirectional. All we're doing is preventing it from going towards the direction of your body.
Right.
So it's still connecting to the tower. It's working perfectly fine, but at the same time, you're also protected.
That's awesome. What else did I wanted to ask you about? Oh, yes, I've been doing some research, Daniel.
Okay.
And I've been wearing an Oura ring at night, and I've been switching off the Bluetooth. So there's been no signal coming out of it, even at a very low level. Is Bluetooth something that you would worry about, or is that too low to worry about?
You now know the facts enough to make a smart decision. Remember we talked about 0.1 watts per kilogram?
Yeah.
A cell phone, a Bluetooth is 0.3. It's 3 times bigger.
Good. I'm glad you said that because I'm hot on Bluetooth and I don't want it anywhere near me.
Right. You do not want to use it, particularly. By the way, we were talking about blood-brain barrier, right?
Yeah.
Well, we find most of the time that if you have a blood-brain barrier dysfunction, it's highly likely you're electrohypersensitive. In other words, if you have a concussion and you have a blood-brain barrier diminished, you're also fairly likely to be impacted by exposures from radiation more than the next person next to you, believe it or not. So when you have a blood-brain barrier breakdown like that, and we know 20% of us do, that means you are more susceptible to that 0.1 watts per kilogram. So when you have a Bluetooth, it's 0.3, and it's all day, or half a day, or if you have it in your cell phone. I don't turn my Wi-Fi on. Bluetooth. I don't turn it on. Why? I don't need it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So if you don't need it, don't turn it on.
And that's the interesting thing about the Oura Ring. It is one of the few trackers where you can actually switch off the signal and you can put it into an airplane mode, which is great because I'm quite interested in tracking things.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can switch the blue. Yeah, exactly. And what I found was interesting was it measures not just your sleep quality, but it measures a few other interesting things like heart rate and heart rate variability. And I have found that So I've always put my phone, or for many years, I've put my phone into airplane mode at night.
Yep.
But more recently, I've played around with switching off all the mains and the chargers near my head as well. So charging the phone over the other side of the room, basically. And so none of the plugs are on. And when that happens, I find my heart rate goes down.
Yep. It's funny you say that, because I was talking with, I was having an interview, and I was talking about managing bees in the room. What I mean by that is, if you have one bee in a room and it stings you, you won't die. If you have 1,000 bees in the room, you can die.
Yeah.
Now, think of it this way. All the cell phones you have has 3 to 4 transmitters. That's 4 bees. If you have a tablet, that's 2 or 3 bees. If you have a laptop, that's a couple more bees. If you have a wireless telephone with a station, and that's more bees. If you have a router, that's more bees.
Yeah.
And the trick in all of this is eliminate the bees, particularly when you're sleeping. So I'm telling this story to this interviewer, and she didn't say anything. She said, "Oh, that's interesting." About 3 months later, she called me up and she said, "I got to apologize. I didn't realize how accurate you were. My husband and I have removed the clocks, the phones in our room, the router that was in our room." And she says, "We're sleeping now all night." I said, "Yeah, that's because those even if it's a very little, it easily disturbs the melatonin process, right? We know that. And so it disrupts your circadian rhythm. There's all sorts of different things that are disrupted as a result of that. So yes, you really want to have elimination of all bees in the room, particularly when it's in your bedroom.
Yeah, bees in the room. And what about blue light? I mean, you've spoken about disrupting circadian rhythm. Blue light is something slightly different, but it's obviously all linked to technology and what it's kind of doing to us. And I've just 1 hour ago received a parcel in the post from you. Thank you for that. With some very smart looking glasses which block 50% of blue light. So what's that for?
50% or 100%. It depends on your choices. So this is what's going on. When you go to your eye doctor and you have these bloodshot eyes and they're always dry, the doctor will say, "Take these drops," and you go home, you put the drops in your eye. Well, that's known as dry eye. Do you know the blue light component of the spectrum is one of the leading ways of disrupting the eye? And so when you put something in your eye, you're not actually fixing the problem. You're just dealing with a symptom. The problem is the blue light component that's coming off your screen on your monitor, on your laptop, on your cell phone. All of the spectrum of light coming off all of these devices emit a blue component. That blue, by the way, is ultraviolet light. It is very close to ionizing signal, right? You know that. So when you have blue, that's right next to ultraviolet, and so it's a very, very strong. It's the almost the strongest. The only one that's stronger is ultraviolet than all the light components. What we do is we just eliminate that component. And if you had dry eye and you put on, and the source of it is from your looking at a monitor, most likely it'll go away. And of course, this macular degeneration, screwing around with your retina. We know that these kinds of technology exposures to our eyes is actually creating premature macular degeneration. And so taking a simple precautionary measure, having a pair of sunglasses, light sunglasses on, really does prevent that component of spectrum that could be potentially dangerous to your body.
Wow, yeah. And I think that it's really nice when you don't have light. You can your full blue blockers, but also kind of a very elegant half blue blocker that you can probably wear out and about without looking so weird, which is nice, isn't it?
Exactly. It's stylish. You'll look good in it, Tony.
Thank you, Daniel. That's very kind of you.
But you know, when you're sleeping at night, we talked about circadian rhythm. When you're sleeping, when you're in bed looking at your cell phone for an hour, you're going to Facebook on your tablet. There's those hard problems, the dry eye, the macular degeneration, but then there's the soft problems. It's screwing around with your circadian rhythm. So you can't go to sleep right away. The melatonin that normally is operating naturally is starting to be screwed up. And so there's this cascade of other problems, health problems, as a result of that. So at night, if you don't need to, you really shouldn't be looking at this stuff. If you do, it should be very, very short use. If you must use it long, you really should take precautionary measures and shield yourself from those kinds of emissions.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's never like you need to. But despite the fact I know all this stuff, I know what I normally do. I normally get into bed and have a look at the old phone before I go to sleep, even if I am kind of reading. Right. But I do think blocking the blue light with some kind of glasses is a really nice idea. So thank you for that. Now, something I've asked you before, and I'm going to ask you again, Daniel, is what is one book you would recommend and one tip for living with more energy and vitality and motivation?
I'll do the energy first. With our press days, very, very busy days, it's sometimes hard to rest and relax. And there are meditation approaches. There are yoga kinds of choices you can make, which I do, by the way. Yeah. But the one I oftentimes, which is a mental thing, is when I want to find rest. I think of a time in my life when I was at the most peace. And I can tell you what it was. I was on the beach. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I was drinking a cup of coffee overlooking the ocean. And it was so peaceful for me that I've never forgotten that sort of calmness. Well, it turns out anytime I do get a bit too busy, not really paying too much attention to my health, I'll often just stop and think about that time. And it helps me relax, like it does with the meditation you may choose. Yeah. So, and the other one, I don't know if we talked about, but believe it or not, I don't have any modern book that I have, I espouse to. It's I have so many things. I'm doing so much. I often don't have time to read full books. Yeah. But I got to tell you, one that goes back hundreds of years almost is Little Women. I don't know why it was, but it was a book that I read 30, 40 years ago. And I just think of the lives of people and how they deal with life. And it was so obvious how they chose to lose their life in a very positive way throughout their entire lives. And I've never forgotten that. So Little Women, it's been around a long time.
Oh, yes. I've just Googled it. It looks like so it's fiction. And it sounds like it's a very famous American book.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was about a family. I'm an engineer, right? So it's not sort of the place I typically go. But for that book, I really did just so much enjoy it. And I got very much engrossed in the lives of these women as they grew up in their lives. Mm.
Daniel, thank you so much. I genuinely think the work you're doing is so important. And I've really enjoyed talking to you again.
Well, thanks so much, Tony. I really I appreciate you offering and inviting me on. And as always, I always enjoy a conversation.
Absolutely.
It's helpful for your.
And where can people find out more about you and also the Defender Shield, the amazing laptop Defender Shield that I love and I use every single day?
Well, so there's the book. The book we wrote was for everyone in general, not the engineers, not the scientists, not the researchers. It's just the common person, particularly women and married women, because they're the ones who are trying to keep their family safe. And so Radiation Nation was the book we wrote, and it really does describe basics in understanding the complex environment we live in and the environment that potentially is polluting our environment from these kinds of toxins that are in the environment. And so Radiation Nation, you can get on our website, which is defendershield.com. And when you get there, we also have a vast amount of products. The last time we spoke, Tony, I think we only had 1 or 2 products.
Really?
But now we didn't have that many. We had a cell phone line that was starting. We had the Defender Pad, but now we have a variety of products that are really designed just to protect your body. And so defendershield.com offers those products, and you can get a glimpse into the kinds of things we offer from defendershield.com.
Super stuff, Daniel. Thank you again, and look forward to catching up at some point in the future.
Very good, Tony. Thanks again.
Well, I don't know about you, but for me, that was just a massive geek out. Just pure joy. Oh. Just as I'm walking past a building site trying to record a podcast as well. Oh well, not going to delete it. Anyway, pure joy, geeking out on the electromagnetic fields with Daniel. Thank you to him for coming on. And it is definitely something that kind of, as I said already, plays on my mind. I think it's something that is really worth considering. And I don't think any of us potentially know the long-term effects of things like our mobile phones and our laptops as well, so even more worth focusing on too. Okay, that is it. The 3 Zesty Things newsletter will be going out again next Monday, so if you want to sign up for that and you don't already get it, go to TonyWrighton.com and have a zesty week. See you soon.